Hey everyone, I hope all of you are having an amazing day and welcome back to Isla la Pacífica, where today we are having a very full schedule, so I need to go through it a little bit faster than usual. But anyway, we are building the Tapir's habitat, which is going to include the final stages of sugar production, which means that we're building a boilery and a sugar refinement house. Then I also need or want to talk about the future of all the projects on the channel, how the next couple of weeks is going to look like. And then finally I need to address a potential mistake that I've made in the last video. This could be a negative mistake or a positive one, depending on how you look at it. But with that being said, so as I said, we are building the tapir's habitat, but of course I'm not really going to focus on the habitat itself. I'm most going to focus on the actual sugar production process. So as I said, we are building a boilery and a sugar refinement house. You could just call it a sugar refinery, but basically we are starting with the boilery, and I would say this is probably the most dangerous part of the entire production process of sugar. So in the boilery, the sugar juice that gets pressed at the mill or press, or in Isla la Pacífica's case at the windmill, gets transported here. In some cases, if the windmill or press or just the mill was close enough, there was actually a direct tap into the boilery. But what happens here is that that's sugar juice, and I really thought that that wasn't the right term for it, so I did not use it in the last video, but I found out it is the right term for it. But the sugar juice goes down the line of, well, the prints that I've used to know how a boilery looked like called it coppers. I've never called pans coppers, but we're going to go with that. But basically the sugar juice gets boiled down on this, through this line of coppers. So after one stage is done, then it gets scooped out of the copper and then thrown into the next one. And then at the end of the line, the sugar juice is basically boiled down until you have some form of crystallized sugar. You can probably already see why I would say this is probably the most dangerous part of the entire process, because you are handling boiling water, boiling sugar, in probably a place that isn't that safety regulated, because yes, all of the steps today and in the last video are sadly for the majority done by slaves, so that does mean that there's not really that incentive to make the process safe, because sadly slaves were seen as somewhat expandable, I think. Because, for everyone that's got horrifically burned or in any way harmed, there were sadly enough slaves being transported from Africa to the Caribbean. So yes, this is, I think, as I said, the most dangerous part, but probably also the one where just the most people got harmed. So yeah, I originally did not want to built the inside of the building. I did not really see the point to it, but then I found those prints and I really wanted to show also the inside of the boilery, because around this time, as I mentioned, there were a lot of prints being made, or there were a lot of prints also of these steps of the production process of things that were usually, I think, a little bit like, it happened, but you didn't really see it happen, as this is very weird to say, but as a free person, you really did not really care, because this was just everyday life, sadly. But I really just wanted to show the inside of the building, because A, I was proud that I found those prints. B, it is a very interesting building. It also goes the same with the sugar refinery, or the sugar refinement house, because, that's the, I would say, at least, potentially could be slightly dangerous if you're thinking of that the sugar crystals might be still warm, but probably the least dangerous part of the entire building, so, or at least of the entire production process. So as I said before, there could potentially be a tap directly from the mill or the press into the boilery, where the sugar juice, which is slightly weirdly green, is basically tapped into the building or tapped into the boilery. So I did include that, even though there's no windmill on Isla la Pacífica right next to the boilery. But I also wanted to make it look like there is actually liquid in, this basin and also in the coppers. So I basically, for the first time ever in PlanetZoo, used the glass, because I could not make small water basins, because That's basically, well, I could maybe do it, but it's very hard to do, especially on such a small scale. But yeah, the entire function as a zoo-wise of the Boilery is actually to give the guest a platform to look at the tapirs, which is a first a little bit because I don't really think about the animals. I just see the animals. This might, you might take this the wrong way, but for PlanetZoo I really see the animals a little bit like decoration. I know you should not think about animals that way, but for the sake of how I build things, they are kind of like a secondary attribute. Like I prefer to build the buildings and sometimes there's no animal included, so yeah, sometimes they just take second place. Though this habitat has a little bit more going for the actual animal because you can basically see them everywhere because, as I said, the boilery is open, but also the sugar refinement or the sugar refinery is completely open. So you basically get to see the entire process of sugar production on Isla la Pacífica. So this might go with like the idea that if you want Isla la Pacífica to be a modern zoo, that it's sort of like a more like museum style zoo where they show you the history of how things went. If you want to think it in my way, then it's basically you get dropped into a time machine and somehow appear in Isla la Pacífica around the 1700s. So right now we are building the sugar refinery. As I said, I would say the least or the less dangerous part of sugar production, because here the crystallized sugar that is basically finished at the boilery is transported here and then basically gets drained, or in a sort of way drained, because of course going through a whole line of being just boiled down, there's of course going to be a lot of liquid still left in these sugar crystals. So the entire idea of the refinery is first of all to drain that liquid and then also to make it sort of ready for transport, because this is something that I knew was the case but I did not really know why. But basically sugar back then you got it in a sort of cone shape. I found out why, because, well, as I said, the sugar still had a lot of liquid left in it, and that's of course not preferable. You want dry sugar. So they basically sort of, well, I think by this point it was still liquid enough to pour, but they basically poured it into this weird cone thing that I'm building right now, with like a hole at the end, and then underneath it was some kind of pot. So at the top in the cone you got just sugar that we sort of knew today, but you still had to basically, well, make it usable. But that step of the process was, I think, either done in home or at another place, probably in home by like servants. But basically in the top cone you have the sugar, and in the pot below where the liquid drains, I think they called that molasses, well, just a sort of syrupy looking sugar, well, side project I would say, or side product, which is also sold. I think I once saw a recipe including molasses, but basically you get molasses in the top or in the lower pot, and then in the cone you have the sugar, which again you probably need to still make usable in-house. But it was a long process to find out how to make this lower pot. The cone was pretty easy, and I'm still very happy that I sort of knew immediately with Ozaru to use the habitat pieces or the climbable habitat pieces, because yeah, they are like the tiniest sticks, or the tiniest, I think they are still called logs, but if that's a log then I am a giant, which yeah is not going to happen sadly. But yeah, it was fun to find out, and also a little bit difficult of like, alright, what can go for sugar? So you can see you get the cone shaped sugar, which again you need to basically make usable in home, and then you get the molasses below. And here is actually where the animal comes in, because here is the tapir's sleeping area, and the entire thing that I thought about like was the tapirs might be attracted by like the sweet scent of the sugar, and they kind of just are allowed in there. Maybe they don't eat the sugar or are in some way like not seen really as pests, but they're somehow in there. Also, yes, I included some like cones being, well, taken apart because it does look like they were able to be taken apart if they weren't being used so that they could be stored. But yeah, I'm still very happy that I found prints of how this entire process looked like. But yeah, the tapirs basically just are a little bit of an addition to here. There's a little bit of a rainforest left for them, but mostly they are just there. But anyway, the last thing that we're going to build that I need to talk about is building a cistern. So as you might realize by now, the boilery is going to use a lot of water. So most of the times these boileries or just the entire sugar production plant or process had a cistern available to them where just rainwater or groundwater was being stored to be used by the boilery or maybe some other parts of the process. And most of the time these cisterns would be underground, of course, to keep the water a little bit cleaner. But for the sake of this being a habitat, I made it an open air cistern. So this would preferably be covered, but again, for the sake of the habitat, I did not want it to, because also this is where I kind of decided why I did not want the Galapagos tortoises here. Well, one of the reasons. The other reason is I did not want the Galapagos tortoise here because of, well, placement reasons. The area isn't really the best suitable for the Galapagos tortoise. But also I just dislike the idea of the Galapagos tortoise being anywhere near the boilery, because I just thought of like tortoise soup by then, which I did not want to have in any way, shape or form. But also the tapirs need water. This was the only location so far besides the lake, which I already planned for another animal. Well, this was just the only location where I could still add water in a sort of reasonable way, since the boilery needed a cistern, and now the tapirs are swimming in the cistern. So yeah, might not be the most clean habitat, or at least the most clean production process, since this water is being used by the boilery. But then also the water is being boiled in the boilery, so probably safe. Probably. But also, maybe they clean the tapirs. I don't know. But that's basically the last thing about the entire building process. So as I said, I also wanted to quickly talk about the, well, future of all the projects going forward on the channel. So no, this does not mean that, oh, Kean Al-Bashar is cancelled. No, Kean Al-Bashar is going to come back, maybe the coming week, if not the week after that. And then I also had the idea of, first, I think I talked about this with Zeta, or Zeta. I probably get your name wrong. I get everyone's name wrong, so I usually give you guys nicknames. But I had the idea, and as I said, I talked or said this to Zeta, where I wanted to build like a modern zoo. And I am actually going to postpone that, or at least that idea, because the original idea was a little bit too large, because I want to keep Kean Al-Bashar the main project on the channel. So if I have like two very big projects, then it becomes a little bit easy or a little bit difficult to juggle those, because Isla Pacífica is a smaller project, so it's easier to juggle those two projects, because one of course is larger, so it demands more attention, and the other one is smaller. So if I, don't have a lot of time for one of those, then I would go with the smaller project. So that's also what I want to do going forward, since Kean Al-Bashar isn't really going anywhere, or at least it's not being cancelled or anything. It's going to come back, and even after building the entirety of Isla Pacífica, I know that my main motivation still lies with Kean Al-Bashar, even though I haven't actually touched Kean Al-Bashar in the past 2 weeks. But that's mostly because of, like, first I had that college test, then I needed to basically round up Isla Pacífica, or get back on schedule with Isla Pacífica. So probably in the coming 2 weeks you will see Kean Al-Bashar coming back. probably in the 2 coming weeks, we are going to finish off Isla la Pacífica. I don't think we will get to like the 10 episodes. I think we will be finished around 8 or 9. So that does mean that there's like 2 or 3 more episodes at most of Isla la Pacífica. And after that, as I said, the smaller projects are going to be temporarily placed on hold until I know how the next coming DLC is going to look like, because yes, I do think that there's a DLC coming and I just want to wait so that I know which animals are in there, what pieces I can expect. So yeah, Kernel Bashar will come back in the next 2 weeks. The project of Isla la Pacífica will get finished up, and then we will wait until the next DLC is announced before I start any new side projects. So that's basically what's going to happen with the projects on the channel. But now for the after video tour, so we're going to do that. So welcome back to the after video tour, where I show off what we've built so far. So you can of course see the boilery and the sugar refinery a little bit more in the background behind all the palm trees. And you can of course see, well, we didn't build this today, but the lighthouse just to know where we are, and the windmill behind this stack of harvested sugarcane. So this stack makes a little bit more sense because it's just waiting to be processed. So we're actually in the exact same location as we started the last after video tour. We're just facing the other direction. And of course we can't start this tour without using our, most used wayfinding tool, which is behind that sugarcane field. There it is. There's the church. So if you don't know where we are, there's the church. Also, the last video basically started off looking that direction, but now we're going the other direction. So we should start moving. So of course we're starting with the boilery, and every building that I've built this video is accessible to the guest. So this is probably the route that the overseer would take. You know, the overseer would probably look at the entire production and just scold everyone who is like a little bit slower or something, because sadly he probably wants the best or the fastest production rate, which means a lot more accidents probably happen. So you can see that the sugar juice, which I'm still amazed that it's called that, basically gets into the boilery on tap, even though there's no mill or press actually on the other side. But I just thought it would be a fun addition, and also because it is somewhat realistic that it could be there. But realistic, it's accurate when it comes to the prints that I've used. But then you can see that's just basically scooped or ladled into the first copper, and then when it's boiled down there, it gets scooped up, goes into the next copper, and then it just goes down the entire line until at the last copper you get probably this sort of still liquidy crystallized sugar, which then, this is also not completely accurate for this location, but I saw it in a print and I wanted to have it here. But you can basically scoop it out of the copper or the pan, because I still have never got a pan of copper until this video. But you can basically scoop it out and then go or scoop it into this pipe, which should probably transport it to the refinery, but here it's just transporting it to a different room. But yeah, you can probably see why this area is dangerous, because even though I removed like the, gushing water because it was a little bit over the top, you can still see, there's a lot of steam, a lot of boiling water, boiling sugar probably. Also, it's fun that the coals, or basically they are the African fire pits, sometimes just shoot out flames. Yeah, or at least sparks. So this is a very dangerous area. But the main function of this area zoo-wise is just to give you a little bit of a balcony into the tapir habitat. You see one there. Also, their sleeping area is actually the sugar refinery, so we should go there. But anyway, I think the guests actually have the worst view here. So we're going into the habitat actually for the inside of the refinery. They pooped here, of course, because it's a tour. The animals must have pooped. But we're actually going to look at... for some reason the camera immediately just wants to put me on top of the cone, but you can just see the stored sugar in the cone, the I call it a molasses pot, but they're just pots to basically drain out the sugar, or at least let the sugar drain out into something where it can still be caught and actually sold. So you can see that the sugar is just drying out, the molasses is probably underneath there. And I don't know if it would be shipped this way, probably in a different way. But I just think it's a nice addition, and yes, the tapirs have just broken into this, pooped, and just made a mess. Because this place would probably be a lot cleaner, or at least will be kept a lot cleaner, because this is where the end product resides. Also, this is the first ever building in the entirety of PlanetZoo that has windows. Also, hi Tapir. Yeah, they are a little bit crazy actually. Like, I've done this tour before, but then, let's just say some issues happened, so I have to redo it, but they are a little bit insane. They do like the cistern though, and I did add this a little bit just so that in case of heavy rainfall, this place doesn't flood. They just open these gates and it's, well, there's a drainage, well, not drainage, it's just let out, and this formed over time by how many times that was done. But now let's search for the tapir. Well, one of them is actually coming towards us. They actually make quite cute sounds. I did not really think about that. But yeah, they kind of make this weird little squeaks. So I don't know where the other one is actually. Oh, there he is. Also, alright, he's a little bit shy. But this log is actually, well, ignore the poop that's next to it, but it is one of those enrichment pieces of like a rubbing post. But I just don't like that plastic look, so I just usually hide it in some kind of trunk or tree or something. Which makes it actually a little bit more natural or realistic looking, because, well, animals in the wild would just, you know, scratch their backs against a tree and not a rubber plastic thing that just magically appears. Going out of the habitat though. So, well, they're actually getting foods. I shouldn't be surprised by that. That's no longer a bug for me for quite a long time. It's still just interesting to say. But anyway, moving forward, so I needed to, well, in the intro I said that I made a potential mistake in the last video concerning the slave living quarters, or the slave barracks. So that building there that I was completely uncomfortable with building, I'm still slightly nauseous looking at it. But I could actually be wrong on that building, in that the slaves wouldn't, well, potentially wouldn't be kept in just one building built for them. They would actually be, this can be positive and negative at the same time, but they were basically booted off the plantation, or at least booted off to the edges of the plantation where they were given or had to build shacks for themselves. And of course this area is just completely still work in progress. It's not going to end up looking like this, but it's a little bit of a positive because I can like bring in a little bit more of like a happy feel to it by including some like Western African culture, because of course, yes, you can ship them across, I think it's the Pacific. Probably wrong, my geography skills are just nowhere. But basically you can ship the people across the sea, but you can't really strip away their culture. So I wanted to have like a little bit more of like Western African influence here, so that they have a little bit of like their own community and aren't stored in what looks like a warehouse. It still feels a little bit off to me, but because they are just basically booted off to scrape a living for themselves together, but I still think it's a little bit more of like a positive feeling than that warehouse. But anyway, so I didn't want to really make a big point out of this, because I think I talked about the slavery issue in the last video pretty extensively. So yay that they have a little bit of their own community. Not so good that they are, first of all, still enslaved and are just forced to live here. Like forced to live anywhere. But now I'm going to actually do something new, because I have not shown you Isla la Pacífica in its entirety yet. So I need to actually do that to make sure that you guys know where the next episode is going to be. But also, yes, I still forgot to build that bridge. We have some facility buildings that I still need to build a shell of, but this is basically the entirety of Isla la Pacífica so far. I don't have any plans to do anything with like the surrounding islands. But the last two remaining habitats, so Kane, if you're watching this, now is the time to really start listening. Because the Galapagos tortoise is going to be the next habitat and it's going to be here. Right on the beach here. Because it's a little bit more of an area suitable for the Galapagos tortoise. Then the last habitat is probably going to be surrounding this lake. Probably a crocodile of some sort. I had originally thought to download that mod that gives you jaguars. But, I mean, looking at the entirety of Isla la Pacífica, there's just not enough space for them to naturally still be here. They would either have been hunted down to extinction on Isla la Pacífica, or they just died out because there's just not enough area for them. There's not enough, like, nature for them. There's just no place for them. So I might download that mod for Clan al-Bashar, but that would mean that I would have to give up the Bengal tiger because the jaguar mod is a replacement for the Bengal tiger. So I'm still debating whether I do that or not. But yeah, this is basically how Planet, whoa, Isla la Pacífica is looking right now. I really messed up there with the names, but yeah, the next episode is going to be on the other side of the island. Since, well, besides the slave village and of course the bridge and a little bit still on the governor's palace, this area is actually completely finished, which is weird. But anyway, that's going to be it for today's video. If you liked it, I hope to see you back in the next one, so don't forget to hit the subscribe button and of course the like button because it does help out a lot. And I wish you all an amazing rest of the weekend. Bye bye.